Now I'm going to teach you how to create your sources in DBT. This is once again telling DBT where exactly your data is that you need to transform and to work with. Now I have here my project. This is my local setup, but if you're following with cloud, this should be very similar to what you have. Now, what we're gonna do is we're gonna work here in the models directory. What you see here is that there is an example. We don't care about that example right now. So I'm going to maybe open up a terminal right here. Navigate to my DBT project, we're correct. Navigate to the models directory. And in here, I'm gonna make a directory, so make a new folder. And I'm gonna call it staging. Staging is the DBT convention. We're not gonna deviate from it. Go to staging. And as you can see, it's completely empty. Now, in staging, right here, the first thing I want to do is to create a file, which it has to be a YAML file. For now, I'm gonna call it sources.yml, but depending on you, I've seen some people that call it like underscore sources, so that it always appears on top. It's an important file. Some people call it based on the origin, so it can be something like BigQuery sources, Salesforce sources, DuckDB sources. In this video, I'm just gonna call it sources, just telling you it's an arbitrary name. It is a YAML file, and the first thing that you need to do is to type version 2. Now, of course, if you look in the DBT documentation, you're gonna find some examples, and hey, look at this. It's already giving me some suggestions on what to do. So indeed, the first thing that we need to do after version.2 is to tell it is a source. We need to give our source a name. I'm gonna call it simply raw. It can be raw data, whatever it is. So far, it should be the same for everybody. But then, once we have this, you can, of course, add a description. So, description, sure, and this works for me. Next, we need to give some information. I'm gonna leave it empty for now. So first is database, second one is schema, and finally it is tables. Now, the reason why I'm leaving this empty for now is because this is not arbitrary anymore. It is very important that you type exactly the same names that you have. If you're working on the local setup and you're working on DuckDB, your database is probably called Taxi Rides NY. I have it here, Taxi Rides NY. My schema, in this case, where I put it, it was called prod. It's fully up to you how it's called. And the tables, as I named them, they were yellow, trip data, yes. Yellow trip data and green trip data. If you follow the setup guide for the local, the local project using DBT Core and DuckDB, this should be exactly the same for you unless you modify something. If you're actually working with BigQuery, then in here under database, so maybe let's do it. You're gonna want to put the name of your Google BigQuery project. So in my case, let me just bring it right here. The name of my project ID is gonna be Zoomcamp plus these numbers. This is what's gonna be my database. I accidentally just closed it. Let me get it back. Here it is. So here's my project directory. My schema is gonna be my data set, which in this case is NY taxi, and the tables is just the tables that you have in there. So just know that if you're working with BigQuery, this is gonna be your project ID. This is gonna be the dataset name, and these are the tables. If remember, if you're working with BigQuery and you follow the exercise, the homework for the week 3, these ones might be called something like partitioned or something along those lines. Whatever you do, and it really doesn't matter, but it's just super important that this actually matches both the database, the schema, and the tables. So in my case, because I'm gonna continue with DuckDB, I'm gonna go for these ones. And finally, the database was taxi rides NY. And this should be the bare minimum. We're just saying, hey, DBT, this is the name of my source. It's an arbitrary name. Ideally, it should be one name per place. Sometimes you would call this like BigQuery data, Google Analytics data, or finance data, whatever it is that's more convenient. And you're gonna provide the specific location of where this data is. Once you have it, we can create our first SQL file, and I'm gonna create one for the green data set. So green trip data.sql. And I'm simply gonna do select everything from, and this is where it gets interesting. Now I could potentially do something like NYC, well, no, this is not what I wanted. I could potentially do the full reference, which is gonna be the name of my database, so taxi rides, and instead of raw, it's gonna be prod. This should work, but DBT has a nicer way of accomplishing it, and that is, instead of hard coding references, we can simply use this very neat source command. So this piece of code is actually called Jinja. You will notice it for the brackets. We're gonna talk a lot more about it, but for now you need to know that this is a source. The first argument is gonna be the source name, which you remember we actually gave it a name. Right here it was called raw data. Once again, important that they match. And here is gonna be the name of my table. Now, if this works properly, the moment I execute, and once again in DBT Clouds, you can do preview, but also with, if you install the DBT Power User extension, you should also be able to do a preview. Moment of truth. And we see right here that it worked. This is the table that I have in my DuckDB database. Whatever happens, just be sure that this is actually running. This part is very important. And now that you have it, it's time to turn this into a proper staging model. As in, we know that it works. Now it's time to professionalize this. The first thing you might want to do is naming convention. I just name it green data, but it is very common to start all of your DBT models with a naming convention of adding STG at the beginning. If it's a staging model, you could potentially do something like int if it's intermediate, empty8 or mart or whatever it is if it's a final one. Sometimes you don't even add anything. For now, I'm just gonna call it like this, denoting that it's part of the staging and that it's part of, and that the name of the table is green trip data. Next thing that I recommend you to do here is do every single cosmetic cleanup that you might want to do in this table. Things like renaming columns and casting them. This is exactly the best place to do them. So in here, I have actually a list of columns right next to me. I'm gonna simply type them. I do have an order here in mind in the screen next to me. Oh, this was exactly the same. I actually meant to do drop off time. Store and flag, passenger count, trip distance, trip type, fare amounts, and so on. Now, I'm probably not going to continue doing every single column, but it does make sense for you to type them. And what I recommend is for you to be very purposeful with the order. So if you notice, this order that I'm following right here is because these ones are the identifiers. So everything that is an ID, I put it in there. These ones are my timestamps, like when somebody was picked up and dropped off. There is some information about the trip, and the ones that I didn't really add in here as all of the financial, or more like payment info. So maybe I have the fare amount, but like we can add, for example, the extras, the tax, the tip amount, tolls, yes, total amount, and payment type, and I believe that's it. This will be the first step to add every single column. Ideally, and this is not like a hard requirement, but this is something I like to do, in an order that makes sense. Once you have this, the next thing you're gonna want to do is to start adding aliases that make sense. Right now, I'm not a huge fan of these naming conventions. I'm personally gonna go for stuff like actual, ooh, this is quite sick. I don't think it's fully correct, but I'm gonna go for it. And oh, nice. All of these AI features that I'm not used to working with. This one I'm gonna call it pickup date time, or you could do it pickup at. That also works, but I'm gonna keep it like this. Now this one I'm gonna keep it like this. Passenger count, I'm fully fine with this. Trip distance, trip type, fare, MTA, let's keep it like this. And okay, let's say I'm happy with all of the other names. The final step that I might want to do to this table is to explicitly cast things in the format that I want. So I personally would prefer this one as an integer. Now that you're on it, AI, I also prefer these ones as integers. This one, I want to explicitly cast it as a timestamp. This one as well. By the way, I really didn't plan this. I'm learning. Passenger count ND, it's indeed an integer. Trip distance, it's indeed a float. This one is an int. Now, instead of float, I could go for numeric. It depends on your platform. I'm just gonna call it float for now. I believe all of these ones are numeric. cast as numeric, all of them numeric. Wow, this goes quite fast. The total amount payment types can be an integer, so that's not a big issue. Perfect, and this one is an integer. It's like this thing is reading my mind. Let's make sure that it works. Run a preview. This looks correct. Now I indeed actually check all of these data types. I'm actually cheating. There is a screen next to me where I can compare these values. But I've been also playing with this data set quite a bit, so I'm familiar. Now the last thing you might want to do here, and this is not generally something that you do, is to filter some rows. I personally took the decision of, directly filter out places where the vendor ID is null. They recommend you to keep staging models as one-on-one copies, so same number of rows and same number of columns. But in this particular project, there are some interesting data quality issues, which we will explain later. And believe me, it's kind of a good idea to do it this way, even though it's not the convention. So let's do a recap. To set up your sources, first you need a YAML file. In this YAML file, you give it a name, fully arbitrary. You need to tell it the database, schema, and tables. And these ones, it's very important that they match. In the case of BigQuery, database is going to be your project ID, schema is going to be your dataset, and the tables, they might be called something like this, or they might have the word partitioned at the end. And for DuckDB, for the local setup, this is exactly the same names that I use by default. If you deviate it, you might need to check. Once we have the sources here, it's good to create our staging files. And these staging files is a place for minimal changes, like casting and renaming. They recommend them to be one-on-one copies, even though we just broke that rule a little bit. And to refer to this, instead of actually hard coding the environment, the database, we can just simply use the source command here in DBT. As long as there is a YAML file somewhere with sources declared, like sources here, and it actually coincides with the exact names in a database, this command should work. So I will leave you to do the yellow data set. We just did the green. Do the yellow data set. Overall, the columns are almost the same, so it shouldn't be that crazy. Take it as an exercise, and once you're done here doing the staging, we're gonna continue talking a little bit more about some other cool features.